I'm in Cambridge, and the first question that I wanted to ask you was about the process of transmission of your instructions to your sidemen. You were telling me that you've spent the last day and much of the previous week in the composing process, and I was wondering, in this particular instance, how are you going to convey what you've composed to the people you'll be playing with?
Well, I think first of all we must understand that the process of transferring information in the world of sound can be attempted in many different ways. What's going to be happening here specifically is they're going to be presented with what is basically a sheet of paper, a white piece of paper. On it there will be symbols. These symbols do not represent in themselves sound. That is part of the process. In the past, I have dictated the alphabet, which then becomes a sound when players make the sound. But you see, sound is already in us, first of all, it seems to me, and that sound is based upon the heartbeat. The heartbeat is in itself a manifestation of rhythm, which I maintain is the first grid or unit of construction in music.
Do you try to convey or rather dictate a particular emotion along with each symbol, or is it a more abstract world of sound?
Good. Because we are bound by tradition. Somerset Maugham, I believe, said that tradition does not always have to be a prisoner. It can be a guide. Within the genesis or the productive causation of what comes forth, there are many avenues from which to choose from. So if, for instance, I would have a trombonist in the back of my head, no matter what I wrote, thinking of in contemporary, if I were to think in terms of sounds emanating from some of the European composers that I find most interesting, Xenakis, Ligeti, but writing for a trombone, thinking of them, but also, of course, naturally thinking of Duke Ellington and that extraordinary trombone section that had Juan Tizo, Tricky Sam, Joe Nanton, and Lawrence Brown. No matter what I wrote, I would have that in my mind, these sources, and would, at a certain point, after the practitioner has warmed to the task of making the vibrations that we later identify as a specific sound, I would then wait to see what his relationship is to the history of the instrument that he's playing, i.e., what sources of power have helped him determine the methodological approach that he uses.
But if you're going into a situation, for example, on this coming update where you're playing with a bass player that you've never played with before, are you trying to anticipate?
That does not mean I'm not aware
you have heard him
and have not heard him play. And indeed, the other thing about this that is wonderful is that players pick me. I don't pick players. It's not a situation in which this is a controlled environment. Quite the contrary. It is. You cannot force anyone to join this community.
What is the role of spirituality in this process?
That's all we're talking about. That too has a history. I'm certain it might have, for me, a different history than, say, the recently departed Rose Kennedy. But nonetheless, my roots would be, of course, partly Kiowa, partly Cherokee, and yes, and the extraordinary long endurance of a maligned civilization, or the West African voodoo, the Yoruba, etc., etc., etc. As well as, of course, given the fact that my last name is Taylor, whatever that means in terms of the British Empire. Yes.
And do you actually go back and find... how do you find sources of inspiration from the maligned West African culture?
Both exist. One is continually... You see, look, let's dispense with stereotypical ideas about what this art form is and what goes into making it. It seems to me that, there are attitudes of preparation. Those attitudes of preparation include, if you are going to play an instrument, it includes researching the past masters of that instrument, the music that they made, but more than that, the methodological concept that produced that music. Since all artists live within a culture, although they can shape the culture, they also are, perhaps unfortunately, victims of a political, imprecise rendering of law. Therefore, we must have a good diet and must also learn how to exercise our bodies physically, you see. There is also another source material. One, we must always remember that if we are practitioners of one particular art, that does not mean that that is the only art in existence. What I have found is that there's a whole panoply of art. And for instance, if I could talk about, Maya Plavetskaya, Bill Robinson, if I talk about Jean Genet, if I talk about Gloria Foster, these are all Carmen Amaya, these are all great practitioners of different arts that have had a great bearing on my own life. And they have offered invaluable strength and have commiserated with me in my own struggles, you see. So there is, and when we talk about these people, the transliteration of their magic, and of course I'm speaking of a great artist like Min Tanaka, who I just worked with recently on 2 occasions, and therefore I'm talking about Buta, I'm talking about Kabuki, and these have all been food or grist for this person's mill. And but the first thing was the integrity, which was perhaps instilled by mother and father, and then the great artists like Duke Ellington, Charlie Parker, Billie Holiday, Mary Lou Williams. I was to find out that I don't speak English in any way. I speak American. It's quite different, However, yes, I'm going on and on and on and on and on. The clouds are sort of graying out here, and it's all, for the most part, flat, but there is a mountain range in the background.
Santa Cruz.
Yes.
Every musician, I suppose, in some sense or another, considers their practice sessions to be something like a ritual. But given the conversation that we've been having, I'd imagine that this sort of conception is more marked in your practice sessions. Do you treat your practicing and your composing as time that's set off.
Well, could I read something that might provide an insight into just what you have said?
Please.
Etheric sound, overlapping rings, loops or scales, a cataleptos, intersect plane inclined at an angle, appearance at a gerononation, in pairs of embryonic seed leaves, to be earth from grave and palm wine, suku, and the yaka, or the inu, the internal head, or the inner spiritual person, ori inu, dicotyledonous, on a terrestrial globe, divine powers concealed, flux, flame, volatile constituent clusters in air, horizontal, energetic flow lines, surround a vertical infrastructural core within cube or square, force symbolizing earth, unity, and an analog. Divide the square in half. Stop time. The diagonal of each brought down to the base creates phi, the golden section. Therefore, the volumetric aroundness, circumference, the expanse across equaling diameter, this constancy of ratio, matter within two proportional quantities, though varied, their ratio remains constant, pi equaling circumference over diameter. That's the first page of a long piece.
Have you ever performed that?
No, but we will probably be performing it sometime within the next 9 days.
So you teach your musicians the poems as well as the...
I do not teach anyone anything. One just presents, and one waits to see what the intake is, or if there is any, and how it is assimilated, and to what use it is put. The idea of teaching is an anathema to me. Why? Because it smacks too much of discipline. Not interested in discipline. And that's a concept that implicitly suggests punishment. I rather like to proceed on the basis of joy, to encourage people to utilize their time in a way that is most satisfactory and most beneficial to themselves. That sometimes takes years to discover. But the idea is to, since we only, as far as we know, have this as our existence on this planet called Earth, it is most significant that given all of the religiosity that abounds, the wars continue, the accumulation of wealth has been acquired by a vast minority of the world's population, and in spite of this, Mother Nature continues. Earthquakes, floods, fires, starvation. There seems to be some question about the concept eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. If an ox gores one, it should be stoned and the owner put to death. That implies that the animal, the quadruped, has the moral qualities of evaluation that the biped has. I think perhaps that's a questionable thought.
You said just now that you're against the concept of discipline. I'm sort of surprised by that because it seems like your actual pianistic technique requires an enormous amount of discipline.
Yes, but that has nothing to do with discipline. That has to do with my receiving joy from the nature of the work that I have chosen to make my life respond to.
When we talked last time, I asked you this question and you laughed. I said, would a conservative concert pianist recognize and approve of your practice regimen?
Who the hell knows or cares?
Fair enough. Are there specific ways in which exercises you can do that can open your ears to musical ideas?
Walking down the street. If one walks with the understanding that we are just a manifestation of plant life, as it exists, that we just absorb all manifestation of life, and that we have in common with mountains, oceans, trees, that ability to continue to believe, to live and have a rhythmical, i.e. growth pattern that is shared by all vestiges found in nature.
I was talking with a man who is going to be working with you shortly, I understand. That's Lawrence Butch Morris. And he said that when he first met you, he frankly confessed that he didn't understand your music on a musical level.
Did he have his hair shirt on?
Excuse me?
Never mind. Go ahead.
Well, it's on tape, so I'll be able to hear what you said. And he told me about your level of patience in explaining it to him. It seems that it's not just enough for others who are unfamiliar with your music to be around you and just to play with you, to actually absorb the music. It seems that according to him, that he was able to understand it due to persistent and patient explanations.
Is that a question or a statement?
It's a statement asking for a response.
Well, fortunately, what happens as we continue to live is... Hold on 1 minute, would you?
Okay.
The process of the intake of knowledge, and based on the field of magnetized invention, i.e. meaning integrity, results in an accumulation, a growing, so that the methods that one can use to impart information changes from year to year. It becomes perhaps easier, but it also becomes more fascinating because one has more material from which to draw from. How much? Oh, yeah. Yeah, okay. All right, hello. So,
okay.
That's it.
Thank you very much. The Cecil Taylor Orgy is starting in about 15 minutes.
Oh, my gosh.
I'm glad I have this on tape.
You have been wonderful.